Hello there, and welcome back to my tier list of wars, which is completely objective and in no way inaccurate, I swear bro. I hope everyone's doing well, but we all know why we're here, so let's get back to history shitposting. As much as this is my personal favourite period to study, the Cold War kinda fucking sucks as a war. If you somehow don't know, the Cold War was a quote-unquote conflict between the United States and Soviet Union during which neither of them would actually fight each other. Instead, the superpowers gave weapons to any pissed-off peasants that would fight the other guy in proxy wars that ultimately became so intense they have entirely reshaped much of the modern world. All of that bloodshed ended pretty pathetically when the Soviets pitifully faded out of existence like a fart in the wind, while the victors had little to show for it aside from bragging rights and not having nuked the world to oblivion. D tier. We're lucky to have survived that one. Conversely, when it comes to late 20th century warfare, the First Gulf War, better known by the name of the offensive campaign Operation Desert Storm, is the pinnacle of military efficiency. Having been locked in the Cold War, much of the US's high-end military capabilities were yet to see all-out conflict, yet every piece of equipment and tactic developed in the wake of their embarrassment in Vietnam would see the Iraqi army decimated. Over 43 days in a 100-hour ground war, the fifth largest army in the world at the time was crushed by the US-led 42-nation coalition in a display so star-spangled it would make George Washington blush. Keeping their traditions alive, the primarily American and British coalition would commit a few war crimes, bombing the retreating Iraqis so hard the road they attacked is now known as the Highway of Death. Overall, Desert Storm is an immensely spectacular display of modern warfare, so I'ma say S tier. The Balkan Wars, the most confusing conflict I've ever come across. The Balkans are a bewildering mess of ethnicities crammed into an area about the same size as Spain, and as you might expect, they all absolutely hate each other. Initially, the Balkan states banded together in 1912 to free themselves from the Ottoman Empire, which at the time was about as functional as a T-14 Armata, and then once that was done, immediately turned on each other. Well, specifically they turned on Bulgaria. I can't honestly tell you what the Second War really achieved, but Bulgaria was soon defeated and the shit these two relatively tiny wars dredged up would directly lead to the July Crisis of 1914, which we all know where that ended up going. Throwing this in F tier. I'm a dumb Westerner and these wars seem pretty trivial to me for the eventual chaos they would lead to, but a big W for weakening the Ottoman Empire. Okay, now we're on to the real shit, the Taiping Rebellion. Chinese history is a fascinating series of dynasties and brutal civil wars, and like most things in Chinese history, the lore behind this conflict is wild. This war saw the long-standing Qing dynasty fighting the self-proclaimed brother of Jesus Christ and his so-called Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, which at its height presided over 30 million people. Over the course of a decade in the mid-19th century, the Heavenly Kingdom's war sent numbers comparable to World War I to the pearly gates, with the Heavenly King and his kingdom also meeting their maker by 1864. Oddly enough, the very friendly and uncontroversial modern Chinese government is actually quite fond of the Heavenly Kingdom, and sees it as an antecedent to the horrific, I mean glorious, Communist Revolution in 1949. I'll put this one in B tier. I just can't get over the self-proclaimed brother of Jesus causing the most insane war in Chinese history that even the commies have respect for. Right off the bat, I'm not even putting this on the list. This is going straight into fucking hell tier. Let's be real, the culture war is some complete horseshit. For one, it's not even a fucking war. It's mostly just brain-dead social media addicts screaming at bots and other individuals with room temperature IQs. Be it abortion, guns, trans people, or whatever issue people will forget about in 3 days, this shit has transformed modern discourse into a divisive rage-baiting cesspit that manages to accomplish nothing outside of pissing off a bunch of people for the benefit of social media algorithms and a few rich people's bank accounts. And anyways, thanks to our new Lord and Savior Luigi, everyone knows it's about the class war now. Well, until everyone moves on from him in a month or so. Hell tier. Fuck this, it's stupid, and it makes me want to hit my phone with a hammer. Okay, this was pretty mid, I'm not gonna lie. For starters, the entire existence of this war is a controversy in and of itself, between the American press fanning the flames around Spanish atrocities to drive up support for a war, and that whole funny business with the USS Maine self-destructing in the Havana harbor. So war was declared on Spain, and I'll admit, for an imperialistic conquest, there were some cool moments, like Teddy Roosevelt's cowboy-ass campaigns in Cuba. But all this war really did was replace Spanish imperial domination of the Caribbean and Philippines with American imperial domination of the Caribbean and Philippines. So, yeah, so much for freedom and liberty. C tier. As much as I am a hater of the French, I gotta give credit for the Norman conquests. The result of decades of strange back-alley promises between European feudal rulers that became a major English succession crisis, everyone and their mother with any shred of power and a connection to the crown was invading England for the throne. William the Bastard would come out victorious, triumphing over Viking Harold and English Harold with a sick trick shot, a bowman sniping English Harold in the eye at the Battle of Hastings after English Harold had killed Viking Harold, with William swapping the Bastard for the Conqueror. The most notable effect of this war, other than the tragedy of the French controlling England, was the introduction of French influence into the English language, giving us many of the funny-sounding words we still use today. I'll put this in A tier. It's a pretty cool conquest, and William pulled off some impressive moves during it. In another addition to F tier, we've got the Russian Civil War. What can I even say here? This was a war between an oppressive monarchy and even more oppressive communist revolutionaries, with a million different separatist struggles thrown in as well. The Tsar sucked, the Bolsheviks sucked, the White Army sucked, the Red Army sucked, the outcome sucked. The only real upside is that it pulled Russia out of World War I, but even this would come with Germany taking a massive bite out of Russian territory. The ineptitude of pretty much everyone involved gave rise to a fascinatingly backwards communist government better fit for a comedy than actually ruling, that would brutally subjugate much of the Eastern world for the next 70 years, bringing several famines and genocides along with it. F tier. Literally just made everything worse for everyone everywhere. If there's anyone that just can't get along, it's the Irish and the English. You'd think that being neighbours, sharing the shitty weather, and both having drinking problems, there wouldn't be too much to be mad about. But as we all know, the English always have to make their presence apparent. I'd wade through the minefield that is covering this conflict, but for my own safety, I'm just gonna throw this in B tier and pray my car doesn't put on a surprise fireworks show the next time I start the engine. On an unrelated note, fuck Margaret Thatcher. B tier. Moving on before something explodes.
Off the coast of Argentina, our island's midst the deep, with 1,800 people and 500,000 sheep.
Speaking of Margaret Thatcher, we've got the Falklands War. I'd say I'm patriotic, but being British isn't always something to be proud of. Even with that, this was a mess of a conflict. The American-allied Argentinian dictatorship had characteristically crashed their economy, and the people were not happy. So what do you do when you're a failing authoritarian government? That's right, declare war on a territory you might sort of once had ownership of, which in this case was the British-controlled Falklands. Now, typically, Britain doesn't like it when people touch the stuff it stole from other people, and given the state the country was in at the time, some good old flag-waving and warmongering would be just what was needed. 74 days later, the British Navy had once again steamrolled a nation for territory that remains contested to this day, Thatcher had a brief popularity boost before going back to being Satan, and the Argentine dictatorship was collapsing even faster than before. How do you fuck up that bad? D tier. When it comes to politics, I'm no extremist, but if there was ever a time for revolution, it was late 18th century France. A nation resistant to reform, a government only representing the needs of the wealthy few, and an economy built on the backs of the criminally underpaid masses. I mean, really, can you imagine? Inspired by the American Revolution, which the French were already involved in because the need to fuck over the English overrides the need to have a functioning country, the breadless French masses rose up and overthrew their hopeless monarchy. Being that this is France, they then began simultaneously fighting every nation from Spain to Russia, including themselves, giving rise to decades of violence and the ascension of one fun-sized Corsican into the military pantheon. I'm sort of conflicted on the French Revolution. It was a noble cause and one of the most important events in European history, but it was also a kaleidoscope of violence that often crossed into barbarity. A real fence rider, I guess. C tier. Borders are a funny thing to start wars over, but if there was anyone in the mid-20th century who was more than willing to mobilize over a line on a map, it was Communist China. Tensions with India had been rising since the Indians granted asylum to the Dalai Lama following protests in Chinese-occupied Tibet, because, well, China isn't exactly known for taking constructive criticism well. So, 2 days before the Cuban Missile Crisis became public knowledge, the Chinese invaded Indian-controlled territory in what interestingly was solely a ground conflict in the mountains. Even more strange though, was India being backed by the Soviets to fight China, especially after the West refused to do the same, further driving a wedge between the two communist states. Despite only lasting a month and being pretty insignificant on the surface, the geopolitical web surrounding this peculiar border war is so fascinating, I'm gonna put it in B tier. Well, you've survived another 10-minute or so shitpost, and I'm proud of you. Like last time, this was just meant to be a fun little thing to get me back into gear to be making videos regularly, and also for me to try some new things editing-wise. But most importantly, I hope you've all enjoyed hearing some more 3000 IQ takes on various wars. I'd love to hear what you all thought of my very intellectually sound picks, along with which you'd move around and why. Coming up next, I've got a video covering the various firearms of John Moses Browning, and I've posted a vote for the next individual firearm video because I'm itching to get back to making those. That's all I've got for now. I hope everyone's week is going well, and I'll see you all in the next one.